private firms. And this is the weakest link for us. We have a lot of scientific research, lots of publications, patents from universities, but low innovation in firms. That's our major problem here.
Okay.
Professors, let me just say that we are now currently broadcasting to YouTube, but in 5 minutes, we are going to officially start the panel, but we are broadcasting to YouTube already.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Good morning, Rafaela.
Good morning.
Rafaela, Professor Zhang, she's our PhD student and she's going to assist us technically if we have some problems with Zoom. She's helping us.
Okay, so now it's 9 a.m. Brazilian time. Good morning, good afternoon. Welcome all to the last day of the 19th Triple Helix Conference. I am Isabella Pessi. I'm a journalist and master of ceremony of this event. And we start our activities today with a dialogue session, which the title is State-Owned Enterprise Innovation and Inventor Mobility in China. At this moment, we kindly ask that only the keynote speakers leave the camera on. And we welcome Professor Dr. Yanreng Zhang and Professor Dr. Adriana Marotti. The floor is yours. Welcome.
Thank you very much, Isa. Thank you very much for all our audience that are resisting in our last day of THC. And it's an honor to have here today Professor Yanreng Zhang. He's an assistant professor at FDDI, the Fudang Development Institute from the Fudang University in Shanghai. I was there. I had the opportunity to head a visiting scholar program at Fudang University in 2019, and I had the experience to know and to see with my own eyes the innovation system in China. And it's very important for us to learn a little bit more about how innovation systems are being developed in China. I think it's an example for us, especially emergent countries like Brazil. So Professor Zhang, I'm going to share the screen and the floor is yours. Thank you very much. Just a remark, Professor Zhang is 11 hours ahead of us, so it's 10 o'clock in the evening there in Shanghai. So thank you very much for accepting being with us so late at the weekend.
Okay. Wait.
Do you see the screen?
Wait a second. Okay. Good morning, everyone. It's my privilege to join this great meeting and present you my recent study titled SOE Innovations and Inventor Mobility, Capture the Incentive Effect of Social Insurance Law on Corporate Innovation. It is well understood that technological innovation from research and development are fundamental to economic growth and business success. But when we ask whether or not the allocation of resources to the innovations is optimal in a free market economy, we would not expect this to be so. As Arrow said, in fact, a downward bias in the amount of resources devoted to inventive activity is very likely. One important reason for the underinvestment is that successful innovations rely on a long-lasting employment relationship, which are vulnerable to opportunism. Therefore, in knowledge-intensive organizations, such as in firms that heavily rely on R&D, the ability to commit to a long-term contract is essential to encourage technological innovations. In this sense, employment and labor laws and regulations can play a very important role in determining the intensity and the direction of people's innovative activities. In the next 30 minutes, I will show you the impact of social insurance law on inventor mobility and the innovation of state and enterprises in China. Over the last century, social insurance funded by social security contributions or payroll taxes has emerged as one of the major functions of government in the majority of OECD countries and most of the rest of the world. For China, social security contributions represent 6% of GDP in 2018. Since payroll taxes can impose a great burden on firms, many scholars believe that social security contributions may increase the cost of hiring inventors and hence cause a reduction in technological innovation. However, even without any social insurance program, R&D firms may choose to underinvest if they cannot reap the full returns from the technological innovations. For instance, employees' movement in and out of the firms may cause knowledge spillover, especially when non-compete agreements are banned or extremely costly to enforce. This leads us to a very interesting theoretical possibility. That is, social insurance programs may reduce inventor mobility and then make firms more willing to invest in R&D. Next, please. Let me show you why. Let me show you why the increase of Social Security contribution may lead to a high incentive to innovate, especially for state-owned enterprises in China. Suppose there are two firms in economy, Firm I and Firm J. Firm I initially hires an inventor and decides whether to invest in R&D. The R&D cost is 30 for the firm. The market value of the invention is 100, and the Firm I pays 17 to the inventor as wage. Firm J hires no worker, no inventor at the beginning, but may poach the inventor from Firm I. For example, right after the inventor has a good idea, Firm J may talk to the inventor and say, if you leave Firm I and work for me with your great idea, you will be better paid. If the inventor decides to change employer for high wage, Firm J will obtain 100 by selling the invention, pay the inventor 71 and earn 29 as a profit. If Firm J poaches the inventor successfully, Firm I will lose money. It paid 30 to perform R&D, but obtains 0. For fearing that inventor will be beat away by the Firm J, Firm I has to lay off the inventor and reduce R&D expenditure at the beginning. Now, suppose that each firm has to pay 1 as Social Security contribution for its employees. Then Firm J will earn 28. If social insurance increases to 2, it will earn 27. Then if social insurance is 29, it will earn 0. When social insurance reaches 30, Firm J will lose money and stop poaching the inventor. In other words, the social insurance play a role in preventing the Firm J from inventor poaching. We find that giving Firm J stop poaching the inventor, whether Firm I will perform R&D depends on its ownership. If Firm I is a private firm, it will lose 30 after paying the social insurance for the inventor. In this case, Firm I will lay off the inventor as before. But if Firm I is a state-owned enterprise, it will also lose 30. However, SOEs in China are not allowed to lay off employees to increase their profit. Given their inventor must be employed and the Firm J won't poach the inventor, it is optimal for the SOE to invent in R&D. Therefore, we can predict that the innovation gap between SOE and non-SOE should rise after Social Security contribution rate is increased. let me talk about some. Next, please. Yes. No. Let's talk something about institutional background in China. Social insurance in China was a key pillar of the communist agenda when the party came to power in the late 1940s. Before the marketization reform, the so-called Iron Rice Bowl provided workers in China urban firms with a number of non-wage benefits under the umbrella term labor insurance scheme. After 1990, private firms play more active roles in China's path to a market economy, and many small SOEs were shut down and privatized under the slogan of grasping the large and letting go the small. As a result, the Iron Rice Bowl was broken as inventors in urban were no longer guaranteed lifelong employment and income protection from illness and old age. Then, a stopgap social insurance system emerging through a series of specific guidelines, regulations, and provisions. However, due to the major gap between the letter of the law and the practice, the stopgap system experienced compliance failures, which lead to a low-level social insurance contribution rate. It was not until 2011 that a comprehensive national framework was built under the social insurance law. Under the new system, whenever hiring new staff, employers need to register them with the local social insurance bureau and the Housing Fund Bureau to initiate or reactivate their corresponding accounts. Employers are obliged to make timely payment for their employees. A late contribution may result in a very big fine. We explore the data of Chinese publicly listed firms during 2008 to 2030 to calculate the average social security contribution rate before and after 2011. As shown in this figure, the average rate is about 12% before 2011, and then raises to around 50% after the policy shock. We also calculated the change of the average rate for SOEs and non-SOEs separately. We find that the enactment of the social insurance law triggers a similar improvement in regulatory compliance for different sectors. Now, let me explain why China's SOE cannot lay off the redundant employees to increase profit. Overstuffing of Chinese SOEs has been commonly understood as a byproduct of government favoritism. During the central planning era, SOEs were financially dependent and supported by the government through different channels, including funding from state and banks and other physical sources from different government agencies, which Kernai, in his seminal paper, called the soft budget constraint. On the other hand, even without an agent problem, Chinese SOEs, as recipients of government favoritism, cannot operate without any political constraint imposed by the government. One of such constraints is that SOEs are not allowed to simply lay off redundant employees to increase profits. While the objective of SOE reform is to improve financial performance of SOEs through market discipline, the state has been hesitant to relieve SOEs of their traditional role as guarantors of the job security. In particular, because domestic employment and social stability remain the main objective of Chinese government and constitute the promotion criteria for officials, the state may boost employment by forced SOEs to limit layoffs and high excess labor. Next, please. Now I can show the data and empirical strategy. The sample in this paper consists of China's Asia publicly listed firms in Shanghai stock exchanges and Shenzhen stock exchanges during the period of 2007 to 2017. Our final sample consists of 689 SOEs and 841 non-SOEs. We use R&D expenditure, the number of patent application, and patent stock as dependent variables. With respect to the treatment variable, we classify a firm into SOEs and non-SOEs based on the type of the ultimate control shareholders. Regarding the political variable, a dummy variable equals 1 for years after 2011 and 1 and 0 otherwise. We also add a set of control variables. Next, please. This figure illustrates the impact of social insurance contributions on corporate innovation. Figure A plots the R&D expenditure of publicly listed firms in China over the sample period and shows that an upward trend, especially after 2011. Figure B further plots the R&D expenditure of SOEs and that of non-SOEs. The expenditure gap between the two groups is very small before 2010. In 2010, people are able to foresee that the social insurance law will be adopted by the Congress in the end of 2010. Then, SOE's expenditure begins to diverge upward from the non-SOEs. Figure C and D respectively consider the number of patent applications and the patent stock for the relevant group and shows the similar patterns. Together, this figure provides some preliminary evidence that the policy shock widens the innovation gap between the SOEs and the non-SOEs. To formally investigate whether the social insurance law enacted in 2011 affects SOEs' innovation activity, we conduct a DID analysis by comparing the innovation of SOE with non-SOEs before and after 2011. Next, please. We find that enacting the social insurance law increases the gap of R&D expenditure between SOE and non-SOE by around 80 percentage points. It also caused a 20% increase in the number of patent applications and 80% in the patent stock. Comparing SOE against non-SOE, these results are consistent with our main prediction. Next, please. A big concern about the DID analysis is that a set of other policies made around 2011 may have encouraged SOEs innovation independently of the social insurance law. So we explore the fact that because the social security contribution rates are the same for all firms after 2011, the treatment effect should be more pronounced for the firms belonging to the industry having low average contribution rate before 2011. So we conduct a difference in differences estimation as an additional test. This result indicates that the innovation gap between the non-SOE and SOE is larger in the industry, bearing a stronger policy shock. Again, it's confirmed our major prediction. Next, please. So far, Our evidence shows that after the enactment of the social insurance law, the innovation gap between the SOEs and the non-SOEs gets larger, which is driven by a high incentive for Chinese SOEs to perform R&D. The logic is that the policy shock helps to alleviate the problem of knowledge spillover, resulting from the job hopping among inventors, which incentivize SOE to innovate. So we try to find supporting evidence consistent with this job hopping channel by using Chinese patent database to show whether the social security contributions affect the gap in inventor mobility between SOEs and non-SOEs. So, next please. We extend the Chinese patent database that links Chinese patent directly from the state intellectual property office of China to all listed firms on the Shanghai or Shenzhen stock exchange. We identify an inventor as having changed their employer if they file 2 successive patent applications that are assigned to different firms. We run 3 regressions with the following dependent variables. First, whether one of the firm's inventors move in or out of the firm in 1 year. The second is the number of inventors moved in or out of the firm in 1 year. Third, the mobility ratio, that is the number of inventors moves in or out of the firm divided by the number of inventors in 1 year. Next, please. This figure shows the time profile of mobility ratio. We can observe the parallel trend before the enactment of the social insurance law. After 2011, something has caused the parallel pattern to break down. The inventor mobility of the SOE decreases relative to that of non-SOEs. Now let me make a conclusion before the presentation is finished. First, we develop a theory where the state put political pressure on the SOE to employ a redundant inventor, but give non-SOEs full discretion in dismissing any redundant employee. The increased fixed employment cost resulting from the social insurance law would either encourage the SOE to invest in R&D or discourage the non-SOE from innovating, which lead to an innovation gap between the SOE and the non-SOE. Then we estimate the effect of an increase in social security contribution rate by comparing the intensity of innovation before and after the social insurance law was enacted between SOE and non-SOE. We find a positive effect of social insurance law on the innovation gap. The policy shock in 2011 increases the gap in R&D expenditure by around 80%, and that in patent quantity by around 20%. Furthermore, I believe this study may add a dimension to the ongoing debate over the role of privatization on technological innovation. Many economists point out that privatization may mitigate the agent problem of SOE and lead to the more efficient allocation of resources to innovative projects. In addition, a privatized SOE becomes more transparent after privatization, which make it easy for private shareholders to induce managers to make more informed corporate investment in technological innovation. Nevertheless, Other economists are doubtful about the positive effect of privatization on innovation. They argue that innovation activity not only generates financial returns to individual firms, but also benefits the society as a whole. Because SOE has more social responsibility than non-SOE firms, they may have more incentive to invest in innovations that improve social welfare. In this study, I further developed this theme by uncovering knowledge spillover from SOEs. Some inventors in SOEs may depart for the market to sell their invention. This is a great loss for SOEs, but not a loss for the society. In other words, we may underestimate the innovation efficiency of SOE without considering the inventor mobility. This may explain why Chinese government is willing to financially support SOEs, even though they are less efficient than their non-SOE counterparts. This is my recent study, and let me stop here, and thank you for listening.
Thank you very much, Professor Zhang, for this insightful presentation. I think you brought many different data, and as we were talking before, some counterintuitive results about the role of the insurance taxes and social insurance taxes and the role of these taxes and the results of those policies for the innovation as a whole and for the society as a whole. I would like to ask you a question. It's just a clarification question. What about how is the percentage of the state-owned enterprises in China for innovative performance? How is the percentage of state-owned firms in the innovation system? Are they really important for the innovation system in China?
Okay, let me see. I think the SOE system play a very important role in Chinese national innovation, because something like space station, you cannot depend on a private firm to develop something like a space station. This is if a private firm try to invest in this field, it must lose money. So in this case, I think SOE is unique, the only choice of Chinese government. If you try to do some great things, you have to rely on SOE rather than private firm, especially for a less developed country. In America, you can rely on some great private firm, but in less developed countries, private firms are very weak. So you have to use SOEs to do some great job. I think so.
That's it's very interesting. I think it also brings some ideas about how to deal with the knowledge workers, because normally I think we tend to treat knowledge workers as researchers with the same premises, with the same mindset as non-knowledge worker, that we can replace a knowledge worker by other without any fact. And I think your results show that it's not the same thing, perhaps for knowledge workers, they are not really only a cost. Normally firms tend to see knowledge firms only as a cost, as another cost, but could be something other, could be something different. I think, thank you very much. Let me open for the audience some questions.
Okay.
Please, you can either raise your hand or open the mic. I see we have here Professor Wilson Amorim. He was at Fudan University as well in 2019.
Mm-hmm.
Good morning, Wilson.
Good morning for everybody. And I'd like to ask you about this. And for the next years, are the government is the government thinking to reinforce this institutional support to the innovation activities with more taxes and new political practice?
Okay, you asked me which kind of new policy was taken to improve innovation in China?
Yes, what I'm thinking is when we think about social insurance, is a very important institutional support.
Yes.
But in this perspective, the Chinese government are planning something more for the next years.
No, I think in the long term we should turn to a perfect intellectual property protection. This is the first best institution, first best system. In my paper, the social insurance policy is only a second best system. When you stay in a country without formal intellectual property protection, something else maybe takes its place. So I don't think it's social security is the best policy for us. We should turn to a perfect intellectual property protection. This is the best way to produce more innovation, I think.
Thank you.
Thank you, Wilson, as well. And Professor Zhang, I was just thinking here, you said in your paper that you didn't find differences. You said that this effect of the insurance taxes law were the same regarding the sector, okay? And the influence of other policies, like, for example, the circular economy law that China made in 2019 was the same for all sectors. But how to perhaps in some other sectors, like the automotive sector, for example, in China, that has a lot of private firms, how do you think this should be different, the results you find in those sectors where private firms are more important?
I didn't say they are more important. I don't understand your question, please.
Okay, let me try to rephrase it. Sorry. You said that the results of the law were the same regarding of the sector, okay? In different sectors, you had the same positive effect of this insurance, social insurance law.
Okay, but before the law is enforced, the social security contribution rate are different. For a private firm, because the law, the rate is very high because the SOEs don't care about pay social insurance for their employees. But for a private firm, this is a heavy burden. So they try to cut the social insurance. And so the real rate is relatively low for the private firm.
Now I see. And then I asked whether, for example, if we could, maybe we could see some differences between sectors where we have more private firms. I don't know if I had the correct premise, but in a sector like the automotive sector, where we have more private innovations driven by private firms in China, like the joint ventures, like NIO, for example, Volkswagen, and some other private firms that operate in China. Do you think this law, this effect of more innovations happened as well?
Oh, yes, because the problem in China is when you have a good idea, you try to leave your original employees and try to sell your idea in the market to someone that you can be better paid. Yes, this is the problem. When you do that and your original employee know that, they have no incentive to provide any R&D expenditure for you. They cannot financially support you to do some great innovation. This is the problem. So when the social insurance is relatively high, the mobility rate must be reduced. When the mobility rate is reduced, your original employees now can predict that you will not leave his company in short you will not leave. If your boss know you will not leave, they have great incentive to pay the R&D expenditure for you. This is the basic idea.
Okay, so they have more incentive to innovate in the same firm, yes.
Yeah, I think the great innovation is a teamwork between your boss and the inventor. They should work together. The boss pay the money and the inventor provide their human capital. That's why they can generate the patent. Yes.
Yes, definitely.
When if they believe that they will separate in the short run, then now the boss will not provide money, but then the inventor cannot provide great effort, right?
Right. It's a matter, I think, this law, I think we could say, created perhaps an environment with more trust among
Yeah,
the
yes.
employers and the employees. I think it's very important.
They can produce a longer relationship, longer employment relationship. This is the key for the national innovation.
It's very interesting because sometimes we think that a more competitive system could make perhaps better innovations, but your data is bringing in something other, something different. Yes, in a in an environment with longer term relationships, with more trust, we can have better R&D results.
That's why SOE in China may be very efficient in innovation, because SOE in China provide job security. Job security is very important for inventor, right? If inventor worries that he will lose his job at any time, he cannot make great efforts. He cannot trust the firm. But if he work for SOE, SOE will provide job security. Then the inventor try to invest more in firm-specific human capital, and they can generate great idea.
I think especially the example you mentioned, like the space exploration sector, for example, this time of these projects are not really short. So you have to keep your professionals maybe for 5-10 years in order to deliver a project, yes? So you have to build an incentive and attractive environment for them, yes? I think that's the main point.
Yes.
Oh, these are very good lessons that we learn from a different environment as China. I hope you see if you have more perhaps questions or comments from our audience. If no, if we have no more questions, we could really thank Professor Zhang for being here so late at night. Just remember to our audience, that's almost 10 o'clock. No, it's almost 11 o'clock in Shanghai, yes? We have a question from Professor Habi just before we close, Professor. Professor Habi Otama, he asks, how did you come across the knowledge spillovers theory?
Okay. Can I see the word?
The words. If you open the chat here, Batchpap chat, and then you can read.
Chat. Okay, I see. How did you come across the knowledge spillover theory? I think knowledge spillover is a big problem in innovation theory. I think this is a crucial problem. I think I don't know how to answer this question.
Perhaps if Professor Habi could explain better, I think the question.
Yes.
You can open your mic, Professor, if you wish.
Hello, everyone. Let me just use the earphones so you can hear me. Hello, you can hear me?
Yes,
I
we
can hear
can
you.
hear you.
Okay, that's great. That's great. In the beginning, you talked about the knowledge spillovers and how it is actually problematic. And I just had a question in my mind. How did you come across it in the literature, and how did you thought about linking it with your research field? Because I'm working on the university spillovers as a sub theme of the knowledge spillover theory. And I know actually there is the issue with understanding how the spillovers mechanisms are actually working. And that's basically what I'm doing in my PhD thesis, is I'm trying to explain how them spillovers works. But the literature is focusing from the beginning of the field on finding evidence on the spillovers as something that exists within a region. And R&D from a company or from a university can impact other companies, but how does the impact could be measured and could be understood in terms of mechanism and not just evidence? So I thought maybe you have some insights, or maybe you have some experience with that. But yeah, it's a little bit complicated when it comes to knowledge spillovers.
Okay, thank you, Professor Habi. I think that the discussion, Professor Zhang, please.
What's his question again? Okay.
I think it was more a comment about the knowledge spillover.
It's actually a comment, and we open the discussion if anyone. It's spillovers is actually not a theme that you could come across easily. It's specific, especially for the people who's trying to understand the informal relationship between firms, R&D firms, and between the universities and the corporations within a region. If you're looking for studying the formal type of relationships between the two, you can go to the triple helix model, use the triple helix model, to use the university industry linkages model. You have plenty of models to use. But if you're looking to study something that hidden a little bit, you cannot see formally, knowledge spillover theory provide actually the framework you might need. But the only issue in the field, it's not the only, but the major issue in the field is actually how those spillovers are working. We basically have three major mechanisms, which are geographic mechanism, research mechanism, and human capital mechanism. And there are many researchers who theorize about them mechanisms and find proxies to prove that them mechanisms exist within a region. I guess the major work was done in the Silicon Valley. If you know the book of Saxenian, Regional Advantage, and that theme was discussed heavily in that book. But in terms of understanding the mechanism, how they work, the field is still lacking this evidence.
Yes, but I think my study provides direct evidence that when inventor produce some knowledge in his original employer, and then he can leave his original employer and take the knowledge to work for another, work for the rival. And so I think this is the direct evidence of knowledge spillovers. And another important thing is when knowledge spillover exists, then we can say that we underestimate the innovation efficiency of SOEs, because many inventors in SOEs depart from their SOEs and work for non-SOEs in China. So I think due to the knowledge spillover, the Chinese government would like to financially support SOEs because they can provide many knowledge, not for themselves but for the whole society.
So thank you, Professor.
You're welcome.
Thank you very much for our audience here at YouTube as well. I think we are getting our time to close. I would like to thank you very much, Professor Zhang. Thank you very much, Wilson, Habi, Isa.
Thank you, Professor. Thank you. Thank you for coming.
Thank you for a great meeting.
Thank you.
Yes,
Have a nice weekend.
Yes.
On behalf of Triple Helix Conference, I would like to thank you all. We will continue now with our panel sessions from 10 to 11 a.m. Brazilian time. Then at 11:10, we begin our last abstract sessions, and we'll meet again here after the lunch break at 1 p.m. Brazilian time for the award ceremony. So see you later. Thank you all.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Hello.
Hello.
Hi.
Hello,
Diane.
Fernanda.
Good morning.
I see I have my hair all over the place. I have so many hair and it's very humid. So I can't keep them. Hopefully, look at that. Oh my God. Bon.
My internet is terribly unstable. I hope everything goes well during the presentation. I called the company. So let's see. I could connect now.
Good. So it's a pity there was not many people at your session on unicorn. It's because it was very clear. It was very nice, actually, clear and so on. So, I mean, I liked it. But unfortunately, I think too many parallel sessions, I think. Next time, they should have a little less.
Yeah. And I think that kind of presentation helps the proposal of the book.
Yes, absolutely. Because you have to synthesize and you have to, basically what will be your message and so on. So I really find that pretty interesting, actually. For me also, though I had listened to it already, I liked it, actually.
Mm-hmm. Okay, one thing, a disclaimer. I just arrived from another town where I had plenty of problems. So I haven't had a shower. I cannot find my lipstick. I couldn't find my earrings, so I found. Anyway, one of the days, but it's okay. No, I didn't have a cable, a bus broke the internet cable. So it's a small town and there is an internet cable, a fiber optic. And so then for the last 24 hours, among many other things, among many other things, I had no Wi-Fi access.
Wow.
Anyway, so I think as Anne said, we have done it. So Anne, you are very elegant as you always, and you too, Fernanda. So I hope I am minimum. I could have...
You look good. You both look good.
I'm just going to take out, I can see that this does not look nice.
So Lourdes, I told Anne that my internet is terribly unstable this morning, so I hope everything goes well.
If not, we'll take over, don't worry.
Okay, thank you.
They look better.
Take over, but not your chapter. I know your chapter, but I know your chapter. I remember very well the fact that in the pharmaceutical industry, so far, we don't have companies from emerging markets, but they from India and Brazil, no? Those are
Henguri medicine from China, Sun Pharma from India, and Europharma from Brazil.
From Brazil. And so basically, how are we going? Who is going to, we have one PowerPoint for all the presentation. Who is going to
pass the slide?
To pass the slide.
I can do. So maybe it's dangerous. If I have
yeah.
with my internet.
I can also do it. The only thing, we just received RAMs, and I have not added RAMs. I'll just have to change.
He sent something. I did not receive anything.
Yeah. He said,
I didn't either.
No.
Fernanda, you are in copy, but PowerPoint, so very difficult to show. Okay, I'm sending it to you, Anne. But you and I are in copy, Fernanda.
My slides tomorrow. Yes, I can see. It was in my spam.
Okay. Okay, so then I can, 1 second, I'll put it in the right, done. Okay, so then I'm going to open and keep them just in case, but it's a PDF, so.
Perhaps when he talks, then he shares the screen. Then he handles his presentation, and then we come back to ours. What do you think?
Okay. One other thing, Fernanda, you introduce the panel, and only after you start speaking, I open the PowerPoint. Is that right?
Yeah, if that works for you.
Yeah.
Yes, please. I'm just afraid of sharing the slides, and during I have a problem with my connection and
Another thing that works well as well is to stop the video at some point. So as long as you can talk.
Yes.
Yeah. Okay. So sorry for I hope I am a little bit presentable.
So what we can do is that we all use the master PowerPoint, but when Ram comes, he has his own presentation, because otherwise it's impossible to merge the two.
Ram, sorry, Ram. And Ram is after you.
Okay.
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 So then I pass the word to Ram. Then Ram brings back to me. Ram is a little bit long, so.
Yeah, but basically he will activating his own thing, or who will?
Well, I can, but it's a PDF.
It's better if it's him, because he's a little bit long and he may want to skip some parts.
Yeah. Okay.
He's not there yet, I know.
Ana Luisa?
Good morning. Yes.
Good morning.
Good morning. I will be here to support you in this session. So if you have any requests or any questions, you can count on me, okay?
Thank you.
Yesterday, the session, they asked me to control the time. If you'd like me to give you a heads up here in the chat individually when your time is up, I can do that.
Yes.
Do you have already a schedule? of your session?
Yes, we do.
If you can send to me in the chat, it can be only to me privately. I can keep track here.
Okay.
And when you're ready to start and I can start recording, you just let me know when I start here, okay?
Okay, actually, we can start. It's 9 o'clock.
Yeah, but Ram is not there. That's a little annoying.
Can
we wait 2 minutes?
Okay, but I would suggest that if he is not there.
Okay, and I will talk to the staff here to see if anyone is talking to him. I don't know if you have his contact or if he sent anything to you.
Okay, and could you send an email to him? Because
yes, sending it right now. First, I'm sending to everybody the what is supposed to be the what you call the round of the show. Yeah, so you will get it. Okay, just send it, and now I'm sending an email to Ram.
Okay.
Okay.
Can I start recording then?
Okay, and 1 second. And why don't you send the Zoom link?
Oui, perhaps, absolutely.
Yeah. Okay, I'm ready if you're ready. Fernanda, are you ready?
Yes.
One more thing, Ana Luisa. Fernanda is having internet problems. So at some point, she may switch the video and continue with the audio, but she will be there, okay?
Yes, perfect.
She sends us an SOS. Okay? Before we start, I know that the recording is on, but Fernanda, you have the WhatsApp of Ram. Maybe you can send.
I will send him a little.
So we'll start in 2 minutes, if you don't mind. So to the audience, welcome to the panel from Copycats to Leaders. We'll start very, very shortly, but one of the panel members has not been able to join, so we are trying to fix this issue.
So Annie is sending the link for him, right?
Yes, I've done it. I forwarded the email from Giuliano. And that's the link I use, and it's working. Just sent him an email asking whether he will join so, and then please see the link below.
Yeah. He's lost with the hour, time zone. He thought it would be in
okay. Okay.
These things happen. That's why I want a calendar invite all the time. That way,
yes.
The right one, yeah. I would suggest to start, and maybe when Ram is able to join us, so we follow as we are, and when Ram is able to join us, then
he speaks. Yeah. Okay.
Okay, so let's start. So sorry to the audience for this small problem. Fernanda?
Okay. So good morning. It's a pleasure to be here in the Triple Helix conference. It's the second time that the University of São Paulo is hosting this conference. It's led by the Triple Helix Association. And for the panel today, we are discussing the book From Copycats to Leaders, Innovation from Emerging Markets. We have here today the editors of the book, Lourdes Casanova. She's a senior lecturer, and Gail and Robbie Canizar is director of the Emerging Market Institute at Cornell University. She is also the leader of our research group, the Emerging Multinational Research Network, which takes care of many issues of emerging markets. And we also have the other editor, Anne Miro. She's a visiting faculty at Cornell University, and together with Lourdes, she works very actively in the Emerging Market Institute. She also is one of the leaders of our research group, the Emerging Multinational Research Network. We also have a global expert in innovation, Ram Mudambi. He is the Frank Spiekerman Professor of Strategy at Fox School of Business, Temple University. And he also is author in our book. And myself, Fernanda Cahan, I am an associate professor at Centro Universitário FEI here in Brazil. We can start with Lourdes.
Thank you, Fernanda. We are very happy to present to you the book that is the first book of the Emerging Multinational Research Network, which is celebrating now its 5th anniversary. We have had a number of discussions, presentations in conferences, and we have written chapters for each other's books. And now we are preparing another one that was presented the day before yesterday about unicorns in emerging markets. And we all will be participating, and the leadership so far is Diego Finkelstein and also Juana Garcia, and Fernanda and Moacir have also done tremendous work on this area. A pleasure to be back virtually at USP in Sao Paulo in a conference that is so important, because it's for so many years I've been talking in conferences about subjects related to innovation and also research, and that's one of the pending tasks. We need to work more closely, academia, business, and the executives from the companies, the business sector. So I'm happy that the conference is again hosted by our dear friend Moacir Miranda de Oliveira, but also at USP, because this institution is very much with other universities in Brazil, but definitely a leader in spearheading the efforts to work more closely with the government and also the business sector. So then I'm going to share my screen and talk about this presentation today, about the book. So the book was a more than 1 year effort, and that a number of authors worked together. The idea was not to have a collection of chapters, but a unifying theme. We see that we are at a turning point. Emerging markets would request transfer of knowledge, and still do, and still should do, but more and more there is innovation coming from emerging markets. And I'll mention one example that has been mentioned many times, but Brazil, for instance, is hosting the birthplace of the only one standalone online bank that is Nubank, and many other things. So then there is innovation coming from emerging markets, and yes, we need to learn from each other, but we need to also to carefully look at innovation that is different and coming from Brazil, Mexico, India, China, of course, and even Nairobi or Lagos, Nigeria or Kenya. So then the book was published 1 month ago, 18 authors from 3 continents and 8 different countries. So when choosing the different participants in the book, we were looking not only to different expertise, and Ram will be joining us and is very important expert on innovation and very important expert in India as well. So that's why his profile was a great profile for us for the book, but many others. And definitely we wanted the same consistency in the messages that across the different chapters. And we work together in a very interesting and constructive way. So here are all the institutions that participated in the project. So we had CASTET, the Innovation and Technology group from the Ministry of Science and Technology in China, but also Copenhagen Business School, Peter Gammeltoft, and also USP with Moasir, of course, and also from the EMI team, we had a number of experts and researchers who worked with us, also Canada, FEI, as Fernanda said, Universidad de los Andes, very important partner, and also Universidad de San Andrés and Tecnológico de Monterrey. I'll pass now the word to Anne, who will be talking about the framework. But before that, you can see in the map all the countries that we covered. So we made an effort to look at this. So the lessons from this innovation coming from all over emerging markets. So what is driving this innovation, the types that we find, and also the outcomes. And we'll talk a little bit more about the outcomes at the end of the presentation. So,
yes.
Anne?
Thank you very much, Lourdes. Yes, basically the idea was to have an idea where do we stand in terms of innovation coming from emerging market? Is basically the landscape changing? So throughout the book, we try to look at the evolution of this particular topic from the point of view of emerging markets, this innovation which emanates from corporation, from emerging markets. So to do that, we had to first to set some sort of analytical framework that you have in front of you. And basically we looked at 3 questions around which the book is organized. First question is that what are the drivers of innovation? The second one is that what types of innovation are we talking about? And the third question is that what outcomes can we basically examine or can we observe in a way? So as far as the driver is concerned, within this first big circle that you see on the screen, we have indicated the chapters which deal with some of the drivers of innovation. And later on, you will have a list of the chapters. For instance, National System of Innovation, we look particularly at this specific element as far as the driving innovation is concerned, within the context of India, for instance, and Rambu Dambi will talk about it in a moment. We also look at the basically the institutional context and the firms which themselves are part of what is considered a national system of innovation. And for them, that again, we zoom either on specific enterprises or on specific countries. For instance, we look in the case of the special environment, which you can find in emerging economies where perhaps the infrastructure is not what you have in advanced economies. So there are specific needs for consumers. And how do companies from emerging answer those needs? What kind of, basically, what are the gaps which are the company are trying to fill? And this is also a driver. We have a particular chapter, for instance, on e-commerce from the companies from emerging market. And in that chapter, we show that the specific environment of emerging market explain to some extent the fact that these firms from emerging markets, actually, they have leapfrog what has been happening in developed market. So that's the first part, if you want, of the book. The second part is that now what types of innovations are more prevalent in emerging markets? So we look, yes, indeed, at product and process and business innovation, which are somehow perhaps more traditional. But we also look at organizational innovation, the so-called frugal innovation, and we illustrate that again with example. Business model, again, the case of e-commerce, and that will be detailed later on. And frugal innovation, we look at it in the context, for instance, of the Brazilian situation. Social innovation, we have a particular chapter who looks at what type of, how enterprises organize themselves and how do they take into account the employer's need and the consumer's need. We have that's a chapter 12, which is also the particular angle. And that actually chapter has been written by a member of our network from Tech de Monterrey. And then finally, the outcomes. I mean, and we look at it at 3 levels. First, at the global, or if you want, macro level, the country performance. And for that, there are a number of metrics which exist, and we detail them, and we look at the pro and cons. We look also at what extent the competitive advantage of companies have been affected. And then we look also at the social development. And to some extent, this is a part which is the most challenging because there are basically no real metrics or measurement which is actually usable on an homogeneous basis and on a global level. So these 3 circles, around these 3 circles, the 3 parts of the book are organized. Lourdes, can you go on or with the next?
No, thank you very much, Anne, for presenting the framework. So now I'll pass the word to Ram, who will talk about the national innovation systems. Ram.
Thank you very much, Lourdes. It's a real pleasure to be here. If I can share my screen, I will do so now. And if you could just tell me if you can see. Can you see the screen? Okay, I see sort of saying that thumbs up. So okay, so we're going to be I'm going to be talking a little about India, the catch-up of the Indian national system of innovation, and I'm going to try and connect to what Anne just mentioned about the whole notion of the whole different kinds of innovation, because ultimately the entire, I firmly believe that the entire catch-up process, or the process of emergence, which I synonymously call catch-up, where these countries start from being developing or poor countries and then graduate to becoming emerging economies, and eventually then successfully join the ranks of the rich countries. And then we have some successful examples like South Korea and Taiwan and so on, which are countries which began a few decades ago as poor countries, but then went through the process of emergence and have given us object lessons for how this process of emergence can successfully occur. And one of the things we noticed from all of those successful cases or successful examples is that these economies transition from being production economies to becoming innovation economies. So initially you have economies which are focused mainly on production, or mainly copy production, and later moving on to innovation. The initial kinds of innovation, again, here I connect to what Anne mentioned just a minute ago, which is there is a whole range of innovation. When we say the word innovation, this is a very, very big word. It covers many things. We say, and these countries initially get into what I call adaptive innovation. Some people call it frugal innovation. Some people call it innovation which is new to the firm, or whatever it may be. But the whole idea of this is that this is innovation. These are not new ideas ultimately, but these are ideas which are known, ideas which are implemented in other parts of the world, which are adapted to particular contexts. So they become frugal, for example. And that is sort of, you might call the intermediate stage of innovation. And the highest level of innovation, which I'm going to talk about more today in regard to India, is global, new to the world innovation, which is ultimately, this is where things are being done in emerging. This is when you're a total innovation leader. And some of the emerging economies we see have done that. We'll look at 3 cases. I'll talk do a little comparative analysis and make the point that the contribution of advanced market multinational enterprises is very critical. And finally, I'll talk about the effect of TRIPS. The transition towards innovation in India went through 3 phases. The national system of innovation policy regime changed from what I call the transition phase, the consolidation phase, the global integration phase. In the transition phase was mainly, as we said, the adaptive innovation, copying this existing innovation and developing basic innovation capabilities. This stage in India, we could probably date to the 1980s, and more importantly, the 1990s. The consolidation phase is the creation of basic innovation and development of process innovation capabilities. A lot of this began in the late 20th century and continued into the early 21st century. And finally, the global integration phase is when you actually begin to see innovation leadership and the development of advanced innovation capabilities, where local inventors work as true partners with innovators in advanced economies. And this, in India at least, is quite a recent development. This is something that we're only beginning to see in the last 5 years or so, and I'll show you some data. Now, we did in the chapter, we looked at 3 particular sectors, 3 industries: wind turbines, pharmaceuticals, and auto components. 2 of these have high technology level: wind turbines and pharmaceuticals. Auto components are medium and high. They're engineer or science-driven industries. One of the industries is novel, new to the world: wind turbines. Pharmaceuticals are established, and autos are traditional, and the innovation capabilities are differential. Now, the transition phase, there were some novel industry challenges, as you can see. For wind turbines, because the industry was new to the world. Pharmaceuticals is mainly an issue of connecting to the global innovation system, starting with reverse engineering, and auto components was focusing on very specific silos within the automotive industry. In the consolidation phase, there was very strong global competition. In the pharmaceutical industry, there was a very, very strong effect of supranational institutions and TRIPS, which encouraged the change in the industry, moving out of adaptive innovation, moving towards product innovation. In the auto components industry, we saw there was an increasing improvement and focus on production improvement. And finally, we see in you can read across the rows in the global integration phase. I'm going to conclude my remarks by making some comparative analyses of now moving from adaptive innovations to ultimately, as I mentioned, the global integration phase, where we look at USPTO patents. These are new to the world. This is the gold standard of innovation, because to get a USPTO patent, you have to prove that you have actually produced something which is new to the world. Totally, the whole world, not simply new to your country. And we see here that the emerging economies, in terms of their this apex of innovation, the top level of innovation, we see China and India are by far the leading emerging market players in the global innovation system. China obviously is by far ahead. India is second. China, remember, the emergent process in China began approximately 15 years before India. And if we look at the Chinese data from 15 years ago, it's actually significantly lower than India is today. But after India, you see the other emerging economies are very, very, very far behind. The other thing we notice here is that there is an incredibly high contribution of foreign advanced economy multinationals to this cutting edge innovation, this cutting edge, bleeding edge innovation that is occurring in emerging economies is predominantly being driven by foreign companies taking advantage of local world-class talent. Okay, so we see that the share in India is over 80%, and this number of 80% above a very, very high percentage is repeated in every other emerging economy except China. China is the only country where we see the local share is the majority. But this has only occurred in China. Again, I don't have time to try to go into that details, but this has only occurred in China in the last 10 years. China also to 2010 was largely driven by foreign companies. If we look at patents with India-based inventors, this is ultimately the by assignee type. We see foreign assignees, foreign companies, you see control 5 have been doing the vast majority of the work, but it is important to see that the rate of growth of the Indian companies, the Indian assignees, is very, very high. You see that, of course. And the second thing I want you to take away from this slide is that the tremendously strong concomitance of TRIPS, because India fully ratifies TRIPS in 2005, and we see the innovation network, the innovation ecosystem of India explodes immediately after that. So clearly, there is research to be done here to prove this link, but clearly it appears that becoming a full signatory to TRIPS had a very strong positive effect, at least in the case of India. We also see that it rise the Indian biopharmaceutical industry can also be tracked to this year, 2005. Again, the market size, you can see, is rising very, very dramatically. And there's one last point I'd like to make about India before I close, and that is India has one advantage that no other emerging economy has, including China. India has the third largest startup ecosystem in the world. And this startup ecosystem is attracting the attention of foreign advanced multinational firms. The primary reason that a lot of core R&D operations are being moved to India by companies like Google, Microsoft, SAP, IBM, and indeed, more recently, even other Chinese companies to take advantage of partnership with these startup companies. In India. And even China does not have an startup ecosystem anywhere near of this size. My takeaways from this are the knowledge asset seeking of advanced country multinational enterprises is a critical part of the emergence of the Indian innovation system. As I showed you in one slide, it is also a very critical part of the cutting-edge innovation system in every emerging economy except China. The advanced market multinational asset seeking is very uneven. We see that China and India are far ahead of all other emerging economies, though we are seeing green shoots in many of them. The full ratification of TRIPS coincided with an explosive growth of its innovation system. And finally, India's startup ecosystem, largest among emerging markets, is a unique advantage in spurring inward R&D investment by advanced market multinationals. Thank you.
Thank you, Ron. Very good presentation. Now we're going to go back to Lourdes.
Lourdes, I think you're on mute. We cannot hear you.
1 second, because when I share the screen, then the microphone is hidden and it takes me a while to find it. And so thank you very much, Ram. Thank you very much, Fernanda. As Ram pointed out, also the national innovation systems in emerging markets are different. And that's why we wanted to uncover in this part of the research and in the book. But very important to have to be aware that you need a national innovation system, some type of coordination. And again, going back to the theme of the conference, some kind of very strong coordination between the government, the private sector, and the academia. So then in the part 1 of the book, we explore a very important part of the innovation. Who is driving innovation in emerging markets? And governments are, and Mariana Mazzucato shows how important governments are in innovation everywhere in the world, in Europe, US, everywhere, but is more clear, is more salient in emerging markets, where very often the private sector, with the exception of China, has a number of weaknesses, and then the government has to jump in. In fact, although it's difficult to measure, while in Europe and the US, the participation of the governments in R&D is about in the private sector 60% and the public sector 40%. In emerging markets, is the reverse. Governments, and that includes, of course, China, are a very important part of the innovation system. In one of the chapters, the chapter that we worked with Diego Finkelstein from Universidad de San Andrés and my colleague Anne Mirou, what we did was to explore important state-owned enterprises. And we compared two that were completely different in size, in the sector, and in the way they operate, and in the way in which the government is very hands-on, as it is the case of the State Grid Corporation of China, or hands-off, as the case of INVAP in Argentina. In both cases, what we want to show is that actually state-owned companies can and are very innovative. So definitely both of them also have become international, INVAP through exports, and SGCC very, very much present in Brazil and all over Latin America. They just bought in 2020 a renewable energy, actually the subsidiary of Naturgy, a Spanish company. They just bought it in December 2020, in a moment in which there is much less international M&A activity by Chinese companies. State Grid keeps very much going global at a fast pace. So then we see also the differences in the case that in INVAP, there is hardly any intervention from the government, but SGCC, we call it symbiotic in the sense that the government used the company for moving ahead into a very successful electrification of the whole country. Also, a couple of things regarding SGCC, that is depends on the year, between the second and the fifth company by revenues in the world. In 2018 was number 2, and now I think the latest ranking is number 5. Much ahead of the next most important electricity company. The size is tremendous. And what they have done also is, because China is such a vast country, what they have done, unlike other countries, is to connect the whole network. We went in January in the US with this difficult moment where the whole Texas was without electricity. Why? Because unlike China, the US, what they have done is to keep the networks independent. So you had 2 towns, one next to each other, one in Arizona with electricity and the other one in Texas with no power, in a moment in which this cold wave was very difficult for the population, and that was because of the business model organized in the US. In China, what they did was to say, you know what, when there is sun in the Gobi Desert and we have a solar panel farm, or when we have wind in other parts of the country, then they can feed the network, and we can piggyback the sun of the Gobi Desert, the wind from another area with very high winds, the major hydroelectric plants or the nuclear plants, and sometimes, like it happens in France, have to be idle because they have to be prepared for the peaks in consumption in the hard winter or in the hard summer. So then that's what they do. And also, as a result, what they want to do is to connect the whole world. They want to connect with the worldwide electricity web, with the same idea, the idea to be able to take advantage of the different sources of electricity, and they have done that already in Southeast Asia, Mongolia, Russia, and they want to do the same in Latin America as well, to connect the networks to be able to take advantage, as I said, of the different sources. And also they can do that because they have what they call high voltage. They use a high voltage technology that was developed in Germany, but used more widely first in China and now all over the world. So right now, State Grid is building the network between I don't remember now the name, the big hydroelectrical plant in the Amazons to Sao Paulo. So how can you do that in a very efficient way because of this high electricity voltage that allows to minimize the losses of electricity in very long distances. That's about it. So I'll pass the word to Anne, who will be talking about e-commerce and a comparison we made between different e-commerce companies from different parts of the emerging markets world.
Can you share the screen?
Yes.
Thank you. Yes, so still in the part among drivers, Lourdes and Ram dealt more with the government part, if you want, of the innovation system. We also looked at basically the role of the firms and the demands from society and the gaps in terms of the way the needs of the society are filled. And one particular example of this situation is in the area of e-commerce. So we zoom particularly on the 4 companies, Alibaba, Flipkart, Jumia, and Mercado Libre. I will leave a little bit aside Flipkart since it has been bought right now, but yet, the interesting is to see how come these companies have really managed to leapfrog other or peers, if you want, in advanced economy. So the important point is basically is that precisely because they were dealing in sometimes difficult environment, they pioneered solutions in their respective region. And the bottom line is at the end of the day, if you take e-commerce, and e-commerce is relatively, I mean, it's not a new activity, if you want, in developed countries. You have the mail order catalogs of the 60s or the 70s, to some extent is e-commerce, but even in the 2000s and so on, in advanced economy, you already had some sort of e-commerce. But the point is, this could not be replicated in a developed market for a number of reasons. I will highlight 2 of them. One is the payment situation and the payment method, and the other one, for instance, is the delivery system. So rather than replicating the way things were operating in advanced economy, they turned, in a way, the disadvantages into business opportunity. And that's basically where they made the difference. Perhaps the next slide will be helpful. Okay. So basically what the 2 areas I mentioned, one obviously is a delivery system where in Latin America or even less in Africa, the postal system are absolutely not comparable to what you find in the US, in Europe, for instance. So how do you deliver goods which have been ordered online? And these companies, Alibaba or Jumia, for instance, or Mercado Libre, they manage to go beyond that obstacle. If you take Jumia, for instance, initially they developed fleets of motorbike with people from the region so that they knew exactly what that particular corner was in a particular city, for instance. But even perhaps more important, or at least as important as a delivery method, has been the problem of basically ensuring the payments. And the lack of financial services is definitely one of the major obstacles of the taking up of e-commerce in Latin America, and also, for instance, in Africa, where only overall, for the whole continent, less than 30% of the population has a banking account, for instance, in Africa. So this had to be dealt with. And both, for instance, Alibaba and Jumia developed their own payment system. I mean, completely independent in a way from the banking system. So that's basically something which made those companies very successful because they really moved ahead of their peers in traditional market. And they did not stop at payments also. In the process, if you want, they developed a number of services, in particular in the financial area, that actually you don't even have yet in developed countries. For instance, Alibaba with the payment arm of, Alipay with the payment arm of Alibaba has developed some sort of lending activities. It's small loans, but it's there. You don't have that in developed countries, or insurance, or even credit card assessment. Same situation with Mercado Pago, who is the payment arm of Mercado Libre. Mercado Libre, perhaps I should present, it is the #1 unicorn in Latin America, and it's really the first company in e-commerce in the region, covering, I think, about at least dozens of countries. So Mercado Pago has set up systems so that you can send payment to friends. You can also enter into small loans, and if they even go now further, it can be used in brick and mortar stores. So it's again one step further. And the last one is Jumia. Jumia is a very interesting case. It's a company which basically operates only for the time being in Africa. And it has developed around the payment pillar a number of additional services like bill payment, or even very, not even linked directly apparently to payment, which is a cell phone recharging, for instance. So all around the original e-commerce activity, all of these companies have developed additional services which are de facto interconnected. And as a result, that makes those companies extremely powerful. And that's basically, that's where the how could I say, the innovation of firms from emerging market in e-commerce, they are really very much around the business model. There are definitely, of course, technological innovation, but perhaps one definite contribution is this ability to organize under more or less the same roof, a full range of services for the consumer, precisely to adapt to the need of the countries. And I think I'll stop there because I think I have basically used all my time.
Thank you, Anne, for the presentation. So I think I will not turn on my camera. I'm having internet trouble here. And if I just speak, I think it's best. So we have this chapter on the pharmaceutical, on the evolution of the pharmaceutical industry in 3 important emerging markets: China, Brazil, and India. The pharmaceutical Chinese market is the second in the world, just behind the United States. The Brazilian pharmaceutical market is the 6th, and India in revenues is the 11th pharmaceutical market in the world. In volume is, I think it's 7th in the world. So when we look at the world pharmaceutical market, we can see it's very dominated by developed country companies. Like when we take, for example, the race for the vaccine in the coronavirus vaccine, we can see these leaders like Pfizer, AstraZeneca, Johnson & Johnson. So if we take only the top 10 global pharmaceutical companies together, they accounted for more than 55% of the global sales for patent drugs. And if we compare these large multinational companies' standards in R&D and innovation, the investments they do, the pharmaceutical companies from emerging markets, they are behind and they are not in the frontier of the technology, most of them. However, in the last 20 years, we can see this traditional R&D model of innovation is changing very much, and we can see the protagonism of some companies in emerging countries as costs per drugs rise a lot and the complexity of R&D projects increase. So in this chapter, we took care of 3 companies, Henguri Medicine from China, Sun Pharma from India, and Europharma from Brazil. And the cases, we detailed how these companies are evolving in their innovation strategies. I think the presentation from Ramodambi explained very much this chart that we can see here, how these companies have started copying, basically making copies of medicines, and they took some advantage of the institutional side of their countries that were not respecting the international patent laws at some point. And especially in the end of the 90s, these institutional contexts were changing in these three countries, and they started basically producing generic drugs. And we can see in the cases that they have built very well this capability, the operational capability and the production capability. And the generic production was, especially in the last 10 years, financing some strategies and some investment and innovation. When you can see, for example, Sun Pharma from India, it's the company that is the most, among these cases, the most successful in the internationalizations. They have, for example, 7 R&D centers around the world today, 3 in India, 1 in the US, 1 in Israel, 1 in Canada. And they are very internationalized, and especially the generic drugs is still the main revenue of these 3 companies. And Sun Pharma is the 4th largest generic producer in the world. Hungary Medicine is more focused, at least now, is more focused in the Chinese market, but they also have R&D centers out of China, 1 in the US especially. And Europharma from Brazil is very focused in Latin America. They have production in most of Latin American countries. And also the international partnerships for innovation are very important in their strategy. And also I can highlight that characteristic in Sun Pharma also. So what we brought in this chapter is how these companies from emerging markets are changing the way in evolving how they are investing in innovation, and especially in these important and large pharmaceutical markets. I think that's it. We can go ahead with Annie with the last part of the presentation. Annie and Lourdes.
Yes, well, I will be very quick because we are running out of time, and it would be good to have a few questions. Just basically in conclusion, all the numerous case studies in the book, they were aimed at showing the extent to which emerging market firms are really moved from imitation, as in the case, for instance, pharmaceutical, to basically innovation and technology leaders. So that was really the objective, and the illustration was done throughout the chapters. In the last chapter, we have basically, very quickly, we show how at the macro level, emerging market countries now feature among, important innovators. Of course, you have, for instance, China, but also India. Yes, there is still room for improvement, but the situation compared to 10 years ago is substantially different. Now you have about, in the top 50 innovator country, you have about 8 or 9 which are emerging market economies. That's the first point. Second point, at the firm level, very interesting to see same thing, increasing presence of emerging market firm among the largest R&D spenders. If you take the 2,500 largest R&D company in terms of largest company in terms of R&D expenditure. You had less than 5% who are from emerging economy. You have now about 25% who are from emerging economy. And this is based on data from the European Union. So the point is that at the end of the day, we are now seeing in emerging market global leaders emerging. And basically, one has to look now at a two-way street relationship between emerging market and more advanced economy in the field of innovation. And I will leave Lourdes the concluding words.
Thank you very much, Anne. So as Anne just said, we try to, at the end of the day, emerging markets are often have plenty of social problems, the poverty, in many cases, extreme poverty. So how do you justify investments in innovation? And what we wanted to show in this last chapter is to say that actually investing in innovation is investing in the future and making sure that the growth will be sustainable. And we have a number of indicators that point to the fact that innovation is a very important, is looking at the future, is making sure that your growth will not up and down, but will be much more stable. And we have the case of China, for instance, that has renewed its commitment to innovation and technology in the full pandemic, and while other countries still are suffering and trying to solve the health crisis. But again, the health crisis has been also for others, and I'm going to talk to Korea and definitely other places where they have developed apps for tracing, for making sure that controlling who has been vaccinated and where the passports, the certificates, that you have digital certificates, so an opportunity to innovate and the importance for innovation, definitely in the medium and the long run. And also cases like Brazil that invests quite a bit in innovation, but definitely because sometimes lack of supervision sometimes, or that the control of innovation is in many different organizations, many different ministries. So then sometimes the outcomes are a little bit weaker than you could anticipate by the investments done. And we can talk more about it if you want about it in the Q&A. So Fernanda.
Thank you, Lourdes. Thank you, everybody. Now we have about 8 minutes for questions and any comments that the audience may have, or even the panelists if want to comment each other's presentations.
You can also add the questions in the chat if you prefer.
I'd like to just make one comment on what I think Lourdes pointed out, the crucial role of the government. And I think, and she mentioned Mazzucato's work, and I think we need to take that work with a bit of caution for a couple of reasons. I think the government, of course, as I pointed out in my own slides, has an incredibly important role to play. I mean, clearly without TRIPS, which is a government relationship, without the government doing that, I think the flowering of certainly the innovation ecosystem in India would not have occurred. Having said that, the government role, which whenever we have seen the government role successful, as in the case of Taiwan or South Korea, and to some extent, I think in India, it has been as a facilitator and not as an investor and not as an innovator. And I think, and to make that a little more sophisticated, a little more nuanced, I think we can look back to the work of Mahmoud and Ruffin, who had a very important paper at AMR about 10, 12 years ago, where they pointed out that the farther behind the country is from the innovation frontier, the more important is the role of the government. So if you're very, very far behind and you know exactly where you have to go, then the government has a big role. They can invest heavily, they can support this industry and not that one, and so on. But as the country gets closer and closer to technology frontier, as it reaches towards the technology frontier, the government needs to step back and basically allow the private sector to take advantage and simply then play the facilitating role, like the referee. have the rules of the game, ensure that property rights are protected, and ensure that, because ultimately the government is very bad, as we know, at taking risks, and the private sector is very good at that.
Actually, I think there is a tremendous change in paradigm as we speak, with President Biden taking a more important role. And I'm going to give you an example, for instance, 5G. Telecom sector, I've worked with in the telecom sector for many, many years. And if you look at the telecom sector in the US, the companies, the AT&Ts, Verizon, etc., are requesting the government to invest in 5G infrastructure in order not to fall behind from China. So I think we are seeing a completely change in paradigm, as you may have read in the last. Okay, and again, we are in emerging markets, so then I fully agree with you. So let me start by the beginning. I fully agree with you. In emerging markets, there is no choice. Governments have to be present because either the private sector is weak and or too worried about facing the different crises of the country, sometimes in survival mode. So no choice. However, I see a change of paradigm, as I told you, that is clearly in the US, in all over the world, in Europe, needless to say, where governments are back into business, and in particular in the technology side, in a very prominent way. So food for thought for definitely Latin America, that had been taken a step back. Governments have taken a step back and saying, okay, markets rule. So I see that very clearly, and I don't know if Anne and Fernanda want to add something. No? Okay, so Anne doesn't want to add. Okay, any other questions from the audience? We have 5 more minutes.
Yes. I have a question. I am one of the panelists, but I have a question that I would point out. So we can see in my presentation, I talked about that, and I think Ron talked about that in explaining how the pharmaceutical industry have developed in emerging markets. I would like to give this question for you three, and of course for me too, how we see the underdogs in the race for the vaccine. So we can see Sinopharm with the CoronaVac that is around the world. We can see the Serum Institute from India that is producing the active pharmaceutical ingredients for many companies in the world. We can see Brazil activating the manufacturing capabilities and are producing the AstraZeneca vaccine and the CoronaVac vaccine here. So how do you see this movement of, especially here from India, Brazil, and China, of these companies? They are not using the very modern technology in the development of vaccines, or are just producing vaccine. But how do you see that movement?
Ram, you want to go ahead? I would like to answer as well.
I would just point out that increasingly cutting edge, new to the world innovation is the product of two forms of collaboration, two dimensional ecosystems. And the one dimension is the collaboration or the connectivity between giant large firms and small startups. The Pfizer vaccine, for example, as we know, came from BioNTech, which is a German small company. And similarly, AstraZeneca vaccine came from University of Oxford, which is also a small university spin-out. So in almost all cases, the innovation ecosystem involves the giant firms, of course, as you see, but the ideas come from small startups. And the second aspect that I would point out very strongly, of course, is the global value chain aspect. Because ultimately, all the innovations come to market from global value chains. And China and India are enormous parts of the biopharma global value chain. China is the biggest source of APIs, and India is the biggest source of formulations. And we know that ultimately, and between China and India, we're talking about 82 to 84% of all drugs, almost 85% of all drugs in the whole world are coming from the China-India nexus. And so, admittedly, I think, Fernando, your point is about cutting edge new to the world innovation, and we saw that I think the COVID case is a bit of an exception in the sense that it is more of like a wartime approach. But even there, we see both China and India have their own vaccines that have come to market. I think there are 2 in India, and there's Sinovac in China, which I think is being rolled out in Brazil as well, to a large extent. Though I think most of the data, at least so far, shows that they're inferior to the Pfizer vaccine thus far. But clearly, the capability of producing that it existed both in India and in China. So that indicates the sophistication of these systems. But I think ultimately, I think that they were all in this together. I think that the connectivity across countries, and say, you know, it's the rich and emerging and us and them, and I think that's the wrong way to look at it. And to say that ultimately, remember that it is an ecosystem and we're all connected across borders.
Anne, you want to say something?
Just one point, actually, and it's not really about medical or pharmacy, but the role of startups actually in the innovation system. We have not mentioned it a lot, but actually Ram put it back in the debate, and I think it's highly important. It's true, for instance, in this particular case, but also, for instance, in some IT-related business, you see some big company like Alibaba or Tencent buying up startups so that they can decide to some extent some of the very innovative ideas. So I think it's very, very important. It would be interesting to see the relationship between the number of startups and the innovation capabilities of the country, of course, taking into account a number of other parameters. But definitely, I think it's a good point that Ram said, and we should also emphasize the importance of startups in the innovation system and capabilities of emerging economies.
Do I have 1 minute or because I know that time is up? So Ana Luisa, you let us know if I can add something or not.
Yes, go ahead.
Well, I think I'm a little bit, okay. Of course, having been vaccinated in the US, have been seeing the success of the vaccination campaign in the US. I am in awe how fast a country that has the capabilities, the innovation, and also from a logistic point of view, the amount of volunteers in that they gave their time for solving the problem has been amazing. In my own university, in Cornell University, has been amazing how well the crisis has been handled. But about the effectiveness of the vaccines, we need more time, unfortunately. And I'm a little bit cautious, mainly after seeing what happened in India. And yes, I think in China, they have vaccinated 900 million people with their own vaccine. That is a traditional one, not Pfizer or Moderna, but definitely different one. I think for the success, the validity, how safe they are, how effective they are, I think it's too early to say. If vaccines from China and from India and from Brazil are equally effective, we may see a turning point in the pharmaceutical industry, an industry that has been dominated by the West, still dominated by the West. So it could be a turning point. It remains to be seen. We need time, only time will tell. Hopefully all vaccines are equally effective because the solution has to come. So we pray that all vaccines are effective and that way we can get out of the pandemic. But of course, the difficult situation in India calls for some caution. And as you know, now the UK has stopped opening up because the prevalence of the Delta variant coming from India. So the UK has been more cautious in this sense. So let's hope so that all vaccines are effective.
Thank you, Lourdes. I think this topic is very interesting. We could discuss the whole day about the development of the vaccine and the role of the emerging markets. Very, very interesting point that Ramudan brought, that 84% of whole medicines in the world come from India and China. That's very impressive, and how these countries had connected to the global value chains in the pharmaceutical industry. So I thank you, all the panelists, Lourdes, Annie, and Ram, for being here today. It was a pleasure, and we continue with the program of the Triple Helix Conference today. We have a lot, so please, you can connect and be with us. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you. Bye. Okay, so the recording has stopped. Okay, so thank you. I think, thank you very much. Ram, I think we have not been together for a while.
I know, because I think I totally agree. I hope that the vaccine is successful so we can actually travel.
Yes.
Now I have not left the US since January of 2020.
Something.
Actually, I take that back.